Something that's been on my mind quite recently, as we head towards the middle point of the 10th anniversary of Peter Capaldi's tenure as the Doctor, is that we're now approaching 10 years since the start of one of the most difficult periods in my life in regards to Doctor Who. A subject I've talked about quite a few times on this channel is the point where I became, for all intents and purposes, a toxic fan. Put simply, for those who aren't familiar, roughly around 2014-2015, three major things occurred to me in regards to Doctor Who. Firstly, developing my critical voice, going from loving Doctor Who unconditionally to figuring out the aspects of the show that I liked, disliked, general stuff. We can't love every aspect of Doctor Who equally. Being more aware of other fans and seeing opinions that I didn't necessarily agree with, and most importantly, more externally to Doctor Who, a lot of personal tragedies and traumas. I don't want to go into the specifics of them, but needless to say, so much of that happened, and as a result, it really had a negative impact on my mental health and made me quite miserable and angry all the time, and naturally, I was not in the position to deal with that. And initially, my coping mechanism was to basically turn Doctor Who into my metaphorical punching bag, and was very critical and very unkind to the show, and would often start fights in comment sections looking for people who didn't agree with what I said, or found other types of Doctor Who toxic fans who had, different arguments. For example, I love the Sixth Doctor, he's one of my favourite incarnations, but a lot of people don't really like him, so I would deliberately seek out the people who were really unkind to the Sixth Doctor. Things like that. In terms of the level of toxic fan, I think I fell under the sort of nerdy side, complaining that I don't like this creative decision because it contradicts this random Classic Who episode or Virgin novel that I've never read. That was mainly how I would go for it, but I am ashamed to admit that there were points where I did almost cross the line, or sometimes did cross the line into prejudice. Like, I can remember saying some really unkind things about Bill Potts in the build-up to Series 10, which is such an embarrassing thing to have gone through, especially considering I would consider Bill to be one of my favourite companions. So, you may be wondering why I'm bringing this up. Well, because I eventually started seeking support for my mental health issues, I began to reevaluate my approach towards discussing my opinions on Doctor Who, and as a result I was able to mellow out and started to recognise just how angry and unkind I was being to it. I'll give you an example. I don't really enjoy The End of Time because of the way it has a very negative attitude towards change and the idea of the show without David Tennant and Rusty Davies, because I feel like it's so pessimistic about the idea of the show without them that subsequent seasons have felt really self-conscious and have either been too scared to commit to significant changes or have just straight up tried to copy Russell's style rather than doing something new. Now, personally, I hope I've been able to present that argument into a manner which, even if you don't necessarily agree, you can understand, because at the time, I was so consumed with rage and filtering everything I wanted to say through anger that it just came out as this incoherent babbling, insisting that it's the worst episode of the entire show, David Tennant's the worst Doctor, Russell T Davies is the worst writer, and I even went so far as to saying it should be struck from the canon because I personally don't enjoy it, and rather embarrassingly, I'm ashamed to admit, even calling it propaganda. That's how bad it got. I think having that self-awareness really helped me to move away from that mindset, because if I didn't, not being able to admit how extreme I took it, I was only going to get worse. And I appreciate that I am no longer in that mindset. I can recognise my mistakes and have a greater appreciation for those stories that I previously despised. As I said, I love Bill Potts, I used to think series 8 and 9 were among the worst of the modern show. Both have now gone up significantly in my ranking, as you saw last year. One of them even ended up in the top 3. And another reason I wanted to do this is because I'm now seeing a lot of similar rants and arguments, arguably worse than what I was doing, quite recently. In fact, both with Jodie Whittaker's run and more recently with Ncuti Gatwa's, and there's so much rage about, and I really want to help make a difference with that. I think what initially made me not realise my behaviour was getting so bad, outside of, just my mental health issues, was the fact that I was so caught up conflicting with other Doctor Who fans with toxic traits that I failed to spot my own being thrown back at them. For example, getting really frustrated with the very gatekeepy Tenant or Nothing community, sort of like trying to say like the show would only be good under him. And because I was someone who rooted for underdogs, I naturally assumed that because I was being more positive the underrated doctors like Colin Baker, it naturally meant that I failed to realise that we were just two different types of unpleasant. And I appreciate this fact in hindsight because it meant that I realised my problem didn't lie with David Tennant or the 10th Doctor, it was with those fans and their very aggressive overreaction to him. So I appreciate I'm no longer in that mindset because I was going dangerously close down to probably the most cringy, toxic fan Doctor Who thing you could do is fantasize about your ideal previous Doctor waking up, it's all just a dream, so everything you hated disappeared, because that's not really fair on people who genuinely, sincerely love the eras that I wasn't a fan of at the time. I especially realised that it was wrong to think that, because now I love the 10th Doctor's era a lot more than I did back then. Additionally, I hope this video will show people that there is a chance that a lot of these rage bait fans will eventually calm down and have a more positive outlook on Doctor Who and life in general. It may take time, but hopefully it is on the cards for some people. I know we can think that they're beyond saving, but I hope that I'm proof that eventually, regardless of how ridiculous and angry you are at some point, if you're self-aware about it and acknowledge your mistakes, you can hopefully try and rebuild and change my ways. Because if that part of my life is to have any legacy at all, I want it to be that it was something that I managed to grow out of. I am no longer that person, and I'm proud to be a much happier and healthier person overall, and having a more fair and critical outlook on Doctor Who. Like, I've seen so many people just actively make up and exaggerate things they don't like about Ncuti Gatwa and this era as a whole, which means it is thankfully guaranteed to get a reappraisal because they've taken it to such an extreme that the rage filter has weakened any validity their arguments might have had. So I want to end this video off with a potential question for people to ponder over. Is it worth being angry at something if you have to exaggerate or even straight up lie about the contents of something in order to justify it, to make it sound worse than it actually is? And if that is the case, are we being too harsh on Doctor Who?